All right, so I've stated that this process of a shift in either supply or demand will lead to a shift in price and quantity towards an equilibrium. Well, what happens if you, who somehow have control over what's going on in the economy, look at what's happening to prices and say, well, that sucks. Maybe you don't want equilibrium to exist. Maybe you would rather have it not exist. So imagine, if you will, we're looking at apartments in New York City. And so first of all, think about New York City. What is New York City? It's basically an island, folks. What does that mean? Yes, it could end up underwater. But there is a limited space, right? There is not a whole lot of space in New York City. Some other things about New York City is that that's where the financial hub of our market system is centered, right? That's where Wall Street is, right? So it's sort of a big deal. That's also where a lot of actors and actresses, it's where Broadway is, right? So what's the demand for apartments like in New York City? Right, so it's limited supply, huge demand, right? So supply is small, it's maybe over here, and demand is huge, which may be over here. So here's demand and here's supply. Going rate for a standard one-bedroom apartment in New York City $2,800 per month. This is about an 800 square foot apartment, one bedroom, quote unquote, one bath. You know, it's all a little bit questionable. But this is how much it costs in New York City to rent an apartment, if we let supply and demand run appropriately, right? Because there's not a whole lot of supply, and there is a whole lot of demand, right? Because everybody wants to go out and become an actor or an actress, and so they got to start at New York City, right? Because that's where you go. You get your foot into Broadway, or off Broadway, or off Broadway, or off Broadway, or off Broadway, whatever, right?
Then you're in the Avenue Q.
Right, exactly. Or you're basically working as a waiter or a waitress, right? I mean, that's sort of like triple off, quadruple off Broadway is singing while you hand somebody their food, right? Or expressively saying, would you like fries with this, right? I mean, something along those lines. So $2,800 a month to have an apartment in New York City. Let's suppose you're working as a waiter or a waitress.
You're homeless in New York City.
You are homeless in New York City. So now I am the mayor of New York City. What am I saying about all of these homeless waiters and waitresses and actors and actresses out there? What am I thinking as the mayor of New York City? Doesn't that suck? Wouldn't it be nice if I could help those people out? So what would I do as the mayor of New York City? I'd say, you know what, this supply and demand stuff, it stinks. I don't believe in it. It's not important. Economics, blah. Yeah, I studied that crap. It doesn't mean anything. It's just a bunch of lines, right? So what I'm going to say is an apartment in New York City should only cost $1,800 a month, period. I am going to put a price ceiling on rent in New York City, so that all of these people who are homeless and can't afford to live in a nice, at least relatively reasonable apartment now can. Wonderful idea, right? I mean, that's what government should be doing for the people, right?
No.
Making it so that they can afford to have a place to live.
Doesn't that lower property values next door?
But that's just the slumlord people. Who cares? We care about the people, right?
They don't care.
So what happens when this wonderful mayor of New York says, okay, let's lower the price of apartments. We're forcing it to be $1,800 a month. Now, but theoretically, you should pay more, but you're not going to have to. So the question then is, what happens to the supply of apartments when he does that? Why doesn't it go, wait, no, it goes up, doesn't it, right? I mean, come on. Lower prices means they're going to offer more, right?
Now anybody can move in.
No, exactly. It actually goes down. Here was how much we were going to supply if the price was $2,800. We lowered it to $1,800. What happened to the supply? Bam. Here's the quantity that we're going to supply. Because this is where the price hits the supply line, right? I mean, that makes sense. Now, we would demand at that $2,800 a month in rent, but what happens when we lower the price? What happens to demand? The quantity that we demand goes way up, right? I mean, it starts going up. Here's how much we demand. And think about it, right? I mean, if you're living in Philadelphia or you know, Pittsburgh or something like that, and you want to become an actor or an actress, I mean, you're living in Philly, it probably costs you around $1,800 a month to rent a one-bedroom apartment there anyways. It costs $1,800. What are you going to do? Move! Of course, you're going to move to New York City. And you're going to have an apartment for $1,800 a month, right? Yeah, because that's what the mayor of New York City said. Unfortunately, what's happening to the supply of apartments? It's going down. It's not like anybody's building a new apartment building. And in fact, what apartment builders were doing, apartment owners were doing back in the 60s and 70s when this first got implemented, they took their apartments that they could only charge $1,800 a month for and started converting them into storage. Why? Guess how much they could charge for storage? Right. $2,800 per 800 square feet. So what happened to the supply of apartments? Went down and down and down. But you're from D.C. or from Philly and you're moving into New York. I mean, what are you doing? You're looking for an apartment, right? So what are you doing? You're putting your name on all the lists of apartments that might be available anytime in the next 10 years or months or whatever it is. And do you ever get an apartment? No. So what you did was that you forced a shortage of apartments. So the mayor of New York City, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you looked at it, he forced a shortage to exist. Now, this forced shortage, in theory, it should be dissolved by the price going up, but we've set a ceiling that says it can't go up. So what? So imagine, if you will, you're an apartment owner in New York City. You're charging people $1,800 a month for rent, and that person comes up to you and says, "Oh man, my toilet's backing up."
Aw. Sorry.
Are you going to go fix it?
No.
Why would you bother? Are you going to get more money out of that person if you go fix their toilet? No. What are you going to do to them? You're going to say, "Well, the drugstore charges $2 to get a plunger. Good luck." If your apartment is trashed and smells like excrement, do you care? No. Why would you? You can only charge $800 a month for this apartment. Why would you ever bother to clean anything up or fix anything? You're not going to get more money for it. Why would you bother? And there's so many people who want that apartment, even though it looks like something unpleasant, people are still going to rent it, right? So why would you bother? Right? It was the creation of slumlords because there was no point not being a slumlord. I mean, you weren't making money on it as an apartment owner. It's not like the government was helping you out yet. I mean, that came on later once they figured out what was really happening. But this is why everybody in New York City became friends with rats, because they had to. Because they lived in the apartment with you. You had to share. It was okay. They were nice.
You couldn't charge them rent either.
Exactly. You tried. All right. So again, so quality. The quality has to fall. The quality of the one-bedroom apartments has to go down to being essentially $1,800 a month quality apartments, which basically means that they were rat-infested, excrement-smelling apartments, and people put up with it because they had to. There was no other way. So if you were a concerned citizen, right, and you were like, okay, you know, I gotta get this apartment cleaned up, right? So what do? I mean, if your apartment smell, you know, if you could see that there's rats living in your apartment and there's like piles of human excrement hanging out places, I mean, what are you going to do? I mean,
Can't clean it up.
Well, you may clean it up, but you don't want to have to clean it up. It's not your job, right? I mean, you're an actor, actress. You're going to be, sailing the big, huge yacht in a couple of months, and so you're not going to clean up this stuff. So what do? You don't have the money. You could abandon it, but then you won't have an apartment. So, I mean, you want this apartment. You want it to be $1,800. It should be worth $1,800. So if it's not worth $1,800, who do you call? If things aren't right, if there's something, well, you're on the right track, but who do you call first? You call the city, right? You call the government. It's the government's job to make sure that this apartment owner cleans up his apartment, right? He's got health code violations. If he's got health code violations, he should be sued and be forced to clean it up, right? So you call the city and you say, bring in the inspector to look at this apartment and see how nasty it is, and it's his job to clean it up, right? I mean, it is. So the city inspector comes in and he looks at it and says, oh, yeah, that's bigger than all the other rats, And he gets out a leash and puts it on the rat and walks him away. But what does he do to the apartment owner?
Slaps him with fine.
Yeah, he slaps him a little fine, gives him a $10,000 or $20,000 fine and says, quit doing that poo-poo. The apartment owner says, fine, here you go, right? And what does the apartment owner do then?
Keeps the money.
He doesn't do anything, but what's he do to you who complained? Oh, yeah, your ass is on the floor right away, right? So you are immediately evicted because you weren't willing to accept the conditions that $1,800 pays you, right? Tough luck. And not only that, but do you think all the apartment owners know each other in the city of New York City?
Absolutely.
Of course they do, right? There's only a few of them left. And they've all turned into big, huge slumlord corporations, so they tell everybody else. So as soon as you put your name on the list anywhere for an apartment in New York City, what happens?
You're ignored.
You're blacklisted, right? So, blacklists for complaining. This is really helping out all those poor people, right? So now that you've been blacklisted and you can't find an apartment in New York City, how are you going to get an apartment in New York City?
You're not.
Well, I mean, there's always some way to get around the law. How do you...
New Jersey and you act like you live in New York City.
Part of it, yeah, probably you start moving away. But you want to live... And you know other people who've gone through the exact same problem as you are. There's 3 or 4 of you. And
Form a coalition.
essentially, you form the coalition. You walk up to an apartment owner. We're all willing to rent an apartment from you. We'll accept the conditions that they're in. We'll all pay you $1,800 a month in rent so that we can live in this 800-square-foot bedroom apartment and share it between the 4 of us, right? What are you going to do? You're going to break the law, right? Is the apartment owner who's going to say, oh, wait, 4 people paying $1,800 a month? Of course, yeah, they're each going to pay $1,800 a month, right? So, but the $1,800 a month is going to come in, without a lease, and so one person's going to sign the lease, but 4 people are going to pay for that lease, right? Every month, the apartment owner is going to be like, yeah, as long as you shut up, I'll shut up. Right? He doesn't mind. He's going to take $7,200 over $1,800. Heck yeah. So what starts happening is you get the black market emerging. So the black market comes out, and now there's lots of apartments available for you if you're willing to pay $7,000 a month for it, right? And the apartment owners will, as long as you shut up, I shut up. I mean, that's the way, you're not breaking the law unless you get caught, right? So as long as no one says anything, is there anything wrong with it? Nope.
It's not lying unless you
get caught. That's absolutely right. So it's not. So here, this price ceiling, this wonderful price ceiling that's trying to save all of the people in New York City to give them a affordable apartment. How's it working?
So awesome.
It was great. Oh. And the government tried to fix it. It tried to say, okay, all of you apartment owners, yeah, you only get to charge $1,800 a month, but now you can apply for subsidies from the government that'll give you an extra $500 a month in rent from the government for free just because you agreed to have an apartment in New York City for $1,800 a month. But as long as the money that didn't get it up to $2,800 a month, none of this changed. It got a little better maybe, because now the apartment was worth $2,300, but it still wasn't up there at equilibrium. People were still coming into New York City demanding apartments, and there weren't enough of them for it. And unfortunately, the nature of us as human beings is that we are going to take advantage of situations as often as we can. because we're, yeah, sad but true. So we won't care if we own those apartments whether or not they suck. We're going to keep them up to date according to the amount of money that we get paid, period. Right? Because we have to get a profit if we own an apartment building. We're not going to, run an apartment if we're going to lose money in the deal. At that stage, we'll, just let the thing fall over. We don't care. Right? Similarly, we're going to make sure that our interests are upheld whenever we possibly can. So we're not going to let anybody break into our business or ruin our business if we can't, deal with the situation that's going on. So these sorts of things happen. Good or bad? I don't know. That's not our job to say. All we're saying is that if you do things that force you away from equilibrium, there are consequences. Right? These are the consequences, right? You have shortages whether you like it or not. You have crap quality to deal with it. And you're going to have some sort of a black market existing and a negative influence on the law.
Being in equilibrium is really a fantasy location.
Oh, yes, of course.
We're just playing around with the fantasy location anyway, right?
Right.
So it's not like we're really tricking it.
Now, we're just saying we can't get there. We're putting a little bar over the top of it saying, yeah, you can try and go up here, but you're going to keep hitting your head on the wall when you get there.
Because it's our point of measure from the start. It doesn't mean that it's actual.
Right.
But it's just the location we would start from.
Well, it's more along the lines of supply and demand are going to dictate a set price. And if that price is above it, we will have we'll have surpluses. And if that price is below it, we're going to have shortages. So as long as the price stays below equilibrium, there's a shortage, period.
Right.
Does a price ceiling have to do with the debt ceiling?
Oh, that's a macro topic. We'll get there when we get there.
All right.
But that's a fun one, too. We'll see. All right, so let's suppose there's another side of that coin. If there's a price ceiling, guess what else there is? Yeah, there is a price floor as well. Now, in a price ceiling, you set the price such that buyers don't have to pay too much. So if on one side of it we're trying to save the buyers, guess what we're trying to do on the other side? Save the suppliers or the sellers, right? So why would a price floor save a seller? Think about what the price floor is, right? I mean, exactly, so that the price doesn't go below a specific point. So imagine, if you will, that here, and here's supply and demand. Let's suppose that this is the dairy industry. And let's be even more specific. Let's call it the Wisconsin dairy industry. And let's imagine that this is the Wisconsin dairy industry back in the early 80s through the early 90s. All right, so back in the 80s, 90s, the Wisconsin dairy industry was having some problems. Now, it wasn't that prices were too high, it was the exact opposite. There was a big surge in milk production back in the 80s and 90s. There were a bunch of new inventions that were created that made milking cows a lot easier, right? The whole automatic milking machines. You just, drive the cows through the thing, and it just, and they go, yeah, don't think about it, it's painful. But it's there, right? And it's happening. All of a sudden, you didn't need to pay 30,000 people to herd your cattle all over the place, right? The cows would automatically come home, and they'd automatically go through the machine, and you hardly had to do anything about it, right? So milk production skyrocketed. When you had a whole big, huge supply increase, what happened to prices? They dropped, right? Supply increases leads to big, huge surpluses. Surpluses lead to lowering prices. I mean, the quantity demanded was way up, right? People were selling lots of milk, people were buying lots of milk, but the problem is that it still costs money to make milk, right? I mean, you have to feed the cows, right? I mean, you got to take care of them, so you got to have fencing, and you got to have land, which means you have to pay property taxes, et cetera, et cetera. There were still costs.
Fix the equipment that you use.
Exactly, right? So there's lots of stuff going on. So the problem is that the price for milk or for a dairy product was essentially, say, somewhere around $1 a pound, or $1 a gallon, if you will, if that gallon was freeze-dried back in the 80s and 90s. And that was what supply and demand was stating, because supply was way up, and demand was up, but not up as much as it maybe was hoped. And so the price kept falling and falling and falling because demand just didn't stay up with it. All right? But what farmers were discovering was that they needed a price of $1.35 a gallon in order to be profitable. These small farmers who were running dairy farms of like 50 to 70 head of cattle. If the price fell below $1.35 a gallon, they lost money. And so you're the governor of Wisconsin, right? You're Tommy Thompson, and you're thinking, okay, save the small local Wisconsin dairy farms. What do I got to do? I got to raise prices up so that they can survive as a business. We don't want them to go out of business, right? I mean, that would be really bad. So we need to save all of our small farms. So this was a campaign we had, Save Small Dairy Farms in Wisconsin. That was our goal. That was the Tommy Thompson goal for creating this program that says, we, the state of Wisconsin, will buy from any dairy producer in Wisconsin milk products at $1.35 a gallon. If you can't sell it to a store for that much, the state will. Granted, you had to go through forms and you had to fill out paperwork, and you also had to freeze it too. You had to freeze dry it so it came in boxes as opposed to gallon jugs, right? And sounds like a really good idea, right? Save the small Wisconsin dairy farms, right? And initially, when they wrote the bill to buy all of this milk, they stated that we would only do this. We would only buy milk from these small dairy farms that have somewhere between 50 and 100 head of cattle, so that the big farmers wouldn't get in on it, right? Because that would be unfair if we let all the big farms do the same thing, right? But what did those big farms do who had 500 to 1,000 head of cattle? As soon as they saw this law come out that said that they couldn't sell to the state, what did they do? But think about it. I mean, think about it. What if someone else right next to you was getting paid to do something by the state, and you were doing the same thing, and they were right next to you, you were not getting paid by the state to do it? What would you scream? Not fair. You're discriminating.
So they sell something else.
So, well, the first thing they do is they were right, because here are these big, huge farms, 500 cattle. They're saying, well, this is discrimination against us. Just because we don't have, if I lost 400 of my head of cattle, if I sold them to someone else, all of a sudden you would start paying me? The state's like, well, yeah, sure, because then you'd be a small farmer. So those guys, they screamed and cried, and they started paying off lobbyists to try and get the law changed. At the same time, what they did on the side was they said, okay, I'm one big conglomerate that's running this 500 head of cattle firm, right? Well, what can you potentially do if you have one firm that has 500 that might get your head of cattle down to, say, only 100 per firm? Yeah, they created 5 subsidiary companies and said, oh, this subsidiary company owns 100 head of these cattle. And I have my second subsidiary company, which I called, Marshall Subsidiary B, as opposed to Marshall Subsidiary A. And I said, oh, there's only 100 head of cattle here. And I said Marshall Subsidiary Company C and D and E. And now all of a sudden I had 5 small farms in Wisconsin.
How could you get away with it? You're a corporation, you got subsidiaries.
Oh, no, those are companies. Those are the companies that are dealing straight with the government, right? And those companies are companies unto themselves. Granted, there is an overlord LLC, but that's a corporation. These are just companies. You have to set up some very fancy strings that tie them together, but that's not a concern for the government.
Oh, they weren't concerned with that.
Well, I mean, they were, but there was no way that they could track each one of these small companies to find out who the parent LLC was. That would be against the law. That would be discriminatory of the government. So basically what all the large dairy farmers did was to say, fine, you're either going to take the discrimination out of the law, or we're going to create subsidiaries such that we can bypass your non-discriminatory statements, period. And so all these big, huge dairy farmers started to be able to sell it to the state at $1.35 a gallon. And so what happened to all those big dairy farms? They got loaded. Oh, baby, man. There's some seriously rich dairy farmers out there, man. And once they got all this money, what did they have to do with it? I mean, you've got all this cash sitting on it. You throw it in the pool and you swim around it in a little while, but eventually you're going to get tired of swimming in money. What do you do with it? You need to make more subsidiaries. But you don't have any more cattle. Where are you going to get those cattle? Buy them. Who are you going to buy them from?
Small farmers that you just run over?
What? No, but we're saving the small farmers, right? But all these subsidiaries all of a sudden had millions of dollars sitting around. And so what did they do to the small farmer? They said, hi, you 75 head cattle farm. I've got $25 million. What are you doing? Do you want a fifth of this? Would you like $5 million? I mean, yeah, you're making money as a farmer, but you're only making a couple, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 a year, and someone's dangling a $5 million paycheck in front of you. What are you doing? You take that $5 million check, you dance all the way to the bank, and there goes the small dairy farmers in Wisconsin, because now they've been turned into Marshall's subsidiary F, which is now my sixth one, and I just continue to get richer and richer and richer. So the whole goal of saving the small dairy farm, did it work in Wisconsin? No. Oh, hell yeah, they were in heaven. It took them a year to figure out how to bypass the law, but eventually they did, and once they did, then they laughed all the way to the bank. Why did this all of a sudden quit becoming such a big deal in the late 90s, early 2000s? To some degree, and what all the big farmers were doing was cutting the supply of milk available. When the supply decreases, what happens to the price? So what ended up happening was that supply decreased until all of a sudden the equilibrium price of a gallon of milk was up here at $1.50. The price floor, folks, is actually still there today.
At
If you $1.35 or whatever it is, that I honestly don't remember what the exact price.
$3 something for a gallon of milk?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's middlemen marking up, blah blah blah.
Is that why our market went to California?
Well, I mean, essentially what ended up happening is that the big dairy farms bought up all the small ones, and then, yeah, essentially they sold a lot of their cattle to beef and cut the supply of milk until the price of milk went back to something that was even more profitable for them. And then they also had to, not take care of as many cows. They discovered that actually taking care of cows is work. I mean, you couldn't just throw them out to pasture and then have them walk back home, right? You had to do something with, there's another byproduct of cows besides just milk, right? When you feed them. And what do you do with that? You spread it all over the fields, and unfortunately they didn't have enough fields to spread them all over, so what they do, they put them in a big, huge bin right on the property and waited for heavy rain to come, and what did they do then? They let it overflow and didn't worry about it, which they discovered was against the law. Oops.
Why don't they have one of those containers up at the Capitol for all the politicians?
They do. It's called the Capitol.
No.
All the fans are blowing in, so the stench just stays there. All right, so again, the whole goal of setting up this price floor to try and save your small farmer, I mean, yeah, it gave him a nice paycheck. I will grant you that a lot of small dairy farmers in Wisconsin made a lot of money out of the deal, but they made it in one big fell swoop and then got out of the business. And again, the other idea behind it was that Wisconsin wanted there to be a good, fair, competitive milk market, right? They wanted prices to be relatively low. And in order to do that, you have to have competition. Once all these small farmers got bought up and all of a sudden there were only a few competitors in the milk market, what happened to this, what did those milk makers do? Yeah, there's no competition anymore. What they started saying was, wait, we shouldn't make so much milk. I mean, making so much milk, all it does is it lowers the price. That's terrible. So instead, we will accidentally have problems, or we'll see that there's a beef market out there that we can slaughter our dairy cows to make even more money on. And then once milk prices go back up, we can even make the same amount of money and spend less. And yeah, well, they're not stupid, right? They're businesses. That's their job. Remember, our job in this part of the class is to make money and to be as big of an asshole as we can. I mean, not true. But again, if we can make more money by doing it, we will. Right? That's the goal. So these price ceilings and price floors, they have good ideas. There's good intentions behind them, but does it work? Well, be careful what you wish for. You might get it. All right? And it's happened lots of times. There's been lots of politicians throughout history who have tried to trick economics, if you will, into not working the way it's supposed to, and it just hasn't worked. So, good or bad, I don't know. It just is what it is. All right, so
Do you know of one that has worked, price ceiling or price floor, that has worked in the last 10, 15 years?
and not having negative. Oh no, none. None that have worked yet. I mean, we've tried, right? I mean, you try and set up there are price ceilings and price floors that exist right now in the energy industry, but it's strictly because the government dictates how firms who produce electricity can charge customers. And that takes us to our next step, right, is when does the economy make equilibrium a bad idea? And I alluded to it a little bit already right here, right? What happened when all those big dairy farmers got together? There was only 4 or 5 of them left in this state. When they got together and figured out how much milk they were producing, what did they all decide? Prices to be even higher for milk. What did they do? Make less, exactly. They said, we're purposefully going to produce. Now, obviously, they didn't say that out loud, right? I mean, because that would be against the law. But they said, or what happened was that all of a sudden the supply of milk fell drastically in the state of Wisconsin. And there was lots of supposed reasons like drought and cost of feed corn for the cows, and the demand for milk was way down, or the demand for beef was way up, so we had to get rid of some of our dairy cattle to make up for that. There were lots of other reasons, but the fact remains is that the supply of milk went way down and the price went way up. All right. I'm a bit of a conspiracy theorist, so my belief is that, hell yeah, they all got together and decided what they wanted the price of milk to be and said, we're going to produce as much so that that's what the price will be. I mean, theoretically that's against the law. That's known as collusion in this country, and if you can prove that someone's doing that, you can send them to jail or get them a $2,000 fine. But no, of course not. Think about if you sell.
When they bought them, okay, I was a dairy farmer. When they bought them cows from the farmers, they paid high price for their cows.
Sure.
Okay, you go put them in the market, you're not even going to get half of what you put into it. So to get their supply or their price to go back up, if they ship them in that, they're going to be losing lots of money.
Why?
Why? Because of what they paid for.
Yeah, I know, but they slaughtered them for beef and made most of the money back almost right away, because beef prices were way up at the time. And the other thing that they were doing, right, is that they were saying, think about it like this: if you sell milk at $1 a gallon and you sell 1,000 gallons, how much money do you make? $1,000. Well, now, if all of a sudden the price of milk is $3 a gallon, how are you going to get to $1,000? Do you need to make 1,000 gallons? No. What do? You say, oh, all I need is 333 1/3 gallons to get my $1,000, right? I'm making the same amount of money, but how much does it cost to produce 1,000 gallons of milk? The cost, right? I mean, they have to pay to keep up the cows, to keep up the machines, to keep the supply chain, but now they just cut it into 1/3. What happened to their costs? Plummeted. So if their costs went way down and the revenue stayed the same, where are they making more profit in these two examples? Right. So the key here is realizing that you can make a lot more money by just raising the price way up and cutting your costs in supply. And again, we'll get to some more examples of that once we get to chapter 6 and, 5 and 6, really. We're almost there. All right, so here, this is one of the big things that keeps us away from equilibrium, folks. And what economists call this, in case you wanted to know, so that you can follow along where we are in the book, this is what's known as market failure. Anytime supply and demand is not where the price is, or if supply and demand aren't dictating where the price is, somewhere close to it anyways, then you have what economists call market failure. And the number one reason that we have market failure, where price and quantity are not relatively close to equilibrium, is when you have a lack of competition, right? So what happens in this case is that you have collusion or outright, OPEC cartel, where back in the 70s, all of the Middle Eastern oil-producing countries decided to cut all of their production by 20 to 25% because they could. The world freaked out. The price of oil, went up 40 to 50%, and the price of gas went from 75 cents a gallon to a whole $1.80 a gallon. Can you imagine that? Gasoline, $1.80 a gallon. People back in the 70s were crapping their pants. $1.80 a gallon.
Crapping our pants in a good way.
But back then, right, the price of gas more than doubled because they did this, right? Because they all got together and said, we're not going to compete anymore. Instead, we're going to party together, right? And this is when the Middle East started buying yachts and nice swimming pools and, well, lots of other nice stuff. Anyways, they made them on money.
Fall into that collusion and cartels?
What?
Monopolizing?
Yeah, same thing, right? So this is a monopoly.
That issue with,
We'll get there.
not the iPhones, Bill Gates,
Windows.
Microsoft.
Yeah. Well, he's the only producer of operating systems. He's the one who's setting the prices for them or guaranteeing that the price has to be set at a certain level. And since he's the only one selling them, he was just jacking it up higher and higher and higher. Yes, he ended up paying, what, $5 or $6 million to the government, basically 10 minutes of his time.
Right.
It's a minuscule amount of money.
Seems like a big deal, though, right? $5 million, that's huge, right? Not for Bill Gates, but. Right, so this is a big one, right? One of the other things that leads to prices not being close to equilibrium are something that are known as externalities. There are two types of externalities. There are negative ones, and if there's negative ones, guess what? Hey, there's positive ones. Cool. All right, a negative externality, there is a byproduct from whatever you're producing that has a negative effect on people who are not buying your product. The classic example for negative externalities would be to think of coal-burning power plants, right? I mean, so coal-burning power plant. There's an N there, I swear. Why is there a negative externality from producing power from coal? There's some environmental issues if you don't take care of the power that you create, right? In this case, the coal that you burn creates a whole lot of carcinogens, which happen to be slightly cancer-causing. And if you let them out into the atmosphere, everybody right around the power plant starts to fall off dead. Minor, just a minor side effect, right? So there was, right, just minor. Right. Again, now you put yourself in the shoes of the guy who owns the coal-burning power plant. What's your job?
Make money.
Make money, right? So your job is to get as much profit as you possibly can, which means you don't want to waste money doing anything other than selling and producing your good, right? That's it. So if you're producing pollution, do you care about it? No, sadly you don't, right? Because of course you don't live right next to your power plant. You live in the suburbs, 3,000 to 5,000 miles away, and you just are sitting on a yacht somewhere, and that's
This
so.
lawsuit's going to cost you probably half a percentage of your profit.
Potentially true. And so what ends up happening is that this negative externality, what do the power plants have to do?
Clean up their act.
They have to clean it up, right? But does that mean that they are producing as much electricity as they could?
Well, no, because they have to put resources into cleaning it up.
That's absolutely right, those poor power plant owners. So here's our coal-burning plant. If he had his way about it, the price of electricity would be 1 cent per kilowatt hour. If he didn't have to deal with the environment and this whole cleanup business, which is just a waste of money, because it's not helping him produce electricity in any way, shape, or form. This is purely a detriment to business, right? But if he has to pay to clean it up, he's wasting resources in order to clean up his pollution. What happens to his supply and demand? If I told you that someone has to pay to clean something up, what's going to go down? The supply is going to fall because his resource prices have risen. So essentially, the real supply curve, it should be right here if we would let him produce the way he's supposed to, which is profit only. Right? But we don't let him because we pass laws that say you have to clean up your pollution. And so he says, fine, here's what I'm going to supply because it's going to cost me more to produce it. What happens to the price of electricity because he does this, though? Yeah, so unfortunately, when we pay for our electricity, we pay 1.8 cents per kilowatt hour of electricity instead of what we should really pay, which is just a penny. I mean, think about that, right? That's almost, a good 20% increase in prices because we're forcing him to clean up the air. Good Lord, isn't that ridiculous? I mean, we're taking profit away from this particular business owner. Remember, all we care about is profit, folks. So, yes, you should be going, oh. Exactly. We should abolish the EPA so they'll stop, forcing power plants to waste money, waste our money. They had minor side effects.
Hey, calm down here, Abramovich. We're not talking about that right now.
But that's unfortunately what happens when you have negative externalities on your product, is that you will have a price that's not where it really should be. Good or bad, that's up for you to decide, right? Me personally, I am a business owner, and I think this is terrible. All I care about is profit. If people die, that's not a problem for me, unless they happen to be one of my workers, because that would suck, right? Because I need to have my cheap labor, and darn it. And so you teach all of your people to live more than 500 miles away from. They can fly their airplanes in to come to work every day.
No, you don't.
Yeah, okay, maybe it doesn't quite work. All right, so those are the negative ones, all right? What other sorts of things have negative externalities? Medications, yeah. Pharmaceutical companies, yeah. I mean, what do pharmaceutical companies do with the, excess waste from all of the chemical reactions they're making to make their drugs? What do they got to do with it? They got to get rid of it somewhere. Where do they put it? Do they just pour it into the river?
Sometimes.
Not anymore. Nicely said. They used to, right? If you used to live in Western Illinois, right outside of the Dow chemical plant, you learned really fast that you didn't swim in the river.
Ooh, paper companies.
Paper companies, yes. There's lots of pulp, lots of burning going on, lots of nasty excess, production going on that you did. Almost anybody that's producing anything has a negative externality. Because you got to throw away waste, right? Mining, yeah. We should start opening up the mines up north, right? Because we need jobs and we need to have cheap iron, right? That's what we need? Oh, yeah. Welding, same sort of business, right? I mean, anytime you're doing any sort of welding, you're running, acetylene torches. That's not so good. All this stuff. I mean, again, it's good or bad. I'm just telling you that it's causing your prices for whatever good they're making to be higher. And you have to accept it, or you have to accept the opportunity cost of not doing it, which is pollution. All right, so what about this positive thing? There can't be anything that you produce that would have a positive side effect because you produce it. Can you think of anything that you would want your neighbor to have even though they couldn't afford it? And you would potentially even be able to pay more so that they would get it. Yeah, so you might have to pay more to get something, but your neighbor, so that your neighbor could afford it because they're poor, right? Suppose you're making almost nothing, but they are making nothing, right? So when you go to get this product, you're willing to pay a little bit more so that they would get it too. Healthcare. Why would paying more for healthcare help everybody, even if they can't afford it?
Because I'm sitting next to him, and if he doesn't have health care and I get sick without my health care, then, boy, we're...
Exactly. So the reason that we have, at a very young age, vaccines is so that we can try and eradicate things like whooping cough and mumps and measles and chicken pox and all those other sorts of things, right? And we, when we can afford it, will pay a little bit more for it so that when people who can't afford it, the government will subsidize it and make it available to them, right? So you can go, and if you're dead, if you're done out, but you can still get vaccines for like a couple of cents because they're subsidized by the government to help you. It's also partially subsidized for those of us in theory who can afford it and pay a little bit more, all right? Now, what does the graph look like for that, though? So under normal circumstances, here's the price for vaccine. Suppose it would normally be, say, $10 a vaccine. And at $10 a vaccine, we would vaccinate, 200 million people in the country. There's 450 million people in the country. So that means that there's 250 million people that are not vaccinated for mumps and measles and whooping cough and all the other nasty, diseases that are out there that if you get it, you're in the hospital for months, and if you're old and you get it, you're dead. So what happens is that the government subsidizes those particular goods, and what they're actually doing is forcing people to have them. They're forcing the demand to be higher. And unfortunately, due to the additional demand on the good, what happens to the price? Yeah. So unfortunately, instead of us paying $10 a vaccine, which is probably what we should have been paying for it, due to this added demand that we want to be out there, right? We want our neighbor to get a vaccine for mumps or measles, because when they get mumps or measles and their kids come over and play in your yard, what's going to happen to you? You get it. Do you want it? No. Right? So this, getting a vaccine, is a positive thing for everyone, right? And the nice part about it is that, this may only say shoot us up to 300 million some people. There's still maybe 100 some odd million people in this country who are not getting vaccinated. But they're separated, right? They tend to be separated out a little bit so that if they do happen to get, they're very rarely going to run into the disease because those of us who did get vaccinated are around them and they're not going to run into it. Essentially, yeah. I mean, the taste preferences of this positive good is forcing the demand to be higher. And so again, unfortunately, what ends up to the price? Yeah, right. So the problem with this prices are higher than they should be. But again, it's one of those things where we don't theoretically mind, right? It applies to both sides. It's just that when it's a negative, it happens on the supply side. The supplier has to clean it up. When it's a positive, it happens on the demand side because we want to make sure everyone gets it. So we force that demand to be higher, and either of those two conditions force the price to be higher. Right? When supply is cut, the price is higher. When demand is up, the price is higher. So either side of an externality, negative or positive, is going to lead to higher prices. Again, good or bad, that's up to you to decide. But that is the way it works economically. All right, so now some other goods that don't have an equilibrium meaning would be things like public goods. Can you do it? Do any of you know how much it costs to build a road? Probably a lot, yeah, but do we really know? I mean, no, because we don't buy roads, right? Do you know how much it costs to put up a stoplight or to put up lighting or, to create an electrical grid?
Aren't they taking just a teeny bit from everybody to do it?
Exactly. So how do we have an idea of how much it actually costs to do these? How do we know what the demand and supply are? I mean, you'd hope taxes could show you how, but you really don't know because it's everyone's taxes and not everyone pays the same amount of taxes. So who's paying for more of it and who's paying for less of it? These things are just hard to figure out, right?
What does it really cost compared to how much they say it costs?
All of those businesses, all that part of it is what's going on. And it's just something else that you have to keep in mind. Is there are certain goods where if there's only one buyer for it, the government, there's no concept of equilibrium, right? Just like one seller makes things bad, one buyer also makes them bad. So there's a good bet that how much we pay to build a road is probably nowhere near what it really should be if it were competitive. Or if we would all start buying roads. So hurry up, would you? All right. So market failure, anytime that price and quantity are moving somewhere that is not the same as equilibrium. Again, the biggest one is this lack of competition, which we will focus on a little bit more once we get there. All right, and that is the end of Chapter 4. So a little homework before I forget. Somebody tell me the page.
73.
Study questions and problems. 90? Okay. Page 90, numbers 2 and 8, and I would like you to redo question number 6 in Chapter 3. Back in Chapter 3, we did number 6 that you said supply or demand was going to increase or decrease, right? Except what I want you to do when you redo it is instead, under each of those instances, tell me what happens to price and quantity because of that change in supply or demand. Okay? So basically, go back to Chapter 3, do number 6, A through I, all the letters. And this time, instead of just telling me what happens to supply and demand, do the 4 steps for each one of them. So if the first step is supply decreases, then tell me, is there going to be a shortage or a surplus? Then tell me what happens to price, and then tell me what happens to quantity. And then repeat that for B, and then repeat that for C. All right? So every subpart to number 6, I want to know what eventually happens to price and quantity. My advice to you is to write the words and draw the picture. So give me a graph for each one of those, if you don't mind. Again, all I'm really looking for is what happens to price and quantity. But graphs are helpful. Strongly encourage them, because come test time, you're going to have to be able to do both.
Hey, look at how good that is. We already have the graphs. Now it's to finish writing them down.
All right.
Now what happens if on what we handed in for homework and we were wrong on some of our
Well, that's where it might not be a bad idea to come and ask. And do realize that I will, if you turned your Chapter 3 homework in today, I will get it graded by Wednesday so that you will know which ones you missed and which ones you didn't from Chapter 3, question number 6. All right, so. Yeah, but you can also wait until Monday to turn it in. So if it turns out you